Hi everyone, welcome to the Droid Garage. Thanks for stopping back again today. If this is your first time checking out other videos, welcome. Today is episode 3. We're going to be doing some more sanding. We started the sanding earlier in episode 2. To sum up, episode 1, we sliced and organized some files, got those printed. Now for episode 2, we did some rough sanding. Basically, we took pieces and we just wanted to get rid of those layer lines. We used 80 grit sandpaper and we used sanding cards for some of the areas down there. Off camera, I did some use files to get some of these little nooks and crannies. It's a Droid, it's a foot. We can get lazy in certain areas. So if you really want to take a close look, you can see there's still layer lines and it's not the best work. But again, if it becomes trouble, if I think it'll be a sore spot later, we can always backtrack to it, but I don't think that it will be. So since last time, we have all the leg pieces sanded, rough sanded, mind you, and we're going to further sand those down and smooth them out in today's episode, and we'll get to that in just a minute. I wanted to point out that I had an issue with, I'm using two printers, a Bamboo P1P, which I love. I can see why all the hype, and that's what I'm using the Acetone Flash PLA Plus filament for, who is sponsoring the build, don't forget. And I will come back to that filament in just a minute because I have some important information to share. But I did want to point out, this is a piece I did on an early one, and there was a layer filament shift, as you can tell. And after I took off the printer, it was fine, but then it didn't adhere very well, and it split into two. And I was going to pitch it and reprint it, but I thought it's a hip piece, and it would be, why not see if we can fix it? I'm sure, this has happened before to me. I'm sure it has happened to you, or it will happen, or may happen if you might get lucky and it not. But I figured it'd be a challenge and just to kind of share the experience that, hey, we all screw up. I'm not a master or a professional at this at all. All I've done so far, if you can look, is, and I'm doing my best there, I just use UV resin and just kind of use that as an adhesive. If there were flat areas, I would put some super glue type of glue in there to hold it as best as I could, but then I pretty much just filled the entire thing with UV resin. And I will put a link in the video notes so you can see the resin that I use and perhaps check it out yourself. I'm very frugal. I'll put that out there right now. So if I leave a link for something, it's generally going to be on the lower price scale, but I don't like to skimp on. If it doesn't work, I won't buy it. So if I'm leaving a link for something, know that it's something that I use, and I wouldn't steer you wrong. So anyway, UV resin on this piece, and I'm thinking, so perhaps in this video, maybe in the next one, we'll start sanding this out and filling it up with some of that Bondo and see if we can get it to pretty up a little bit. So that's where we're at right now. In just a minute, we are going to come back and we're going to talk a little bit about Bondo filler putty. And this is the stuff we're going to be using. Again, I will leave a link in the product notes if you want to check it out. And we are also going to be using some regular old acetone. I got this at the hardware store. Shop local. So give us a minute and we will come back and we'll get started on some more sanding. Thanks for sticking around, guys. As a reminder, the entire build is being sponsored by Acetone and their new Flash PLA Plus filament. I will leave product links in the video notes. This entire process, even though we're doing videos roughly monthly, is being done live for the most part. So in the last video, we just started doing the 80 grit sandpaper pass of the pieces, and since that time, I've been able to work a little more closely with the Acetone's filament, and I kind of wanted to show you. So here's a piece that we did, and it smooths out really well. It's hard, as you would expect it to be, but it was so easy to sand with. I'm in love with it, honestly. I really suggest you check it out. And to compare it with another piece of a different brand of filament, if you look, I don't know if it's really showing up on video too well, but you can still see lines and little marks here and there. And in today's video, the process we're going to work on is really going to take care of this, but there is so much less work to do on the piece that printed on the Acetone filament. Honestly, we could probably, I'm kind of curious if going with a higher grit sandpaper after this and then going straight to a filler primer would be good enough on that. Maybe we'll try that on one of the pieces. But what we're going to do today is we are going to mix some Bondo with some acetone, and this is a process I found online searching YouTube, and I found this, I think it was Darkwing Dad. He's another builder and maker with a YouTube channel you might want to check out. His process is thinning it down to the point where he applies it with an airbrush. I have not used an airbrush on it yet. Maybe, again, maybe we'll try a few pieces that way during this build, just to kind of compare the two. My process has been to apply it with a cheap paintbrush and let it dry, and we'll sand it off. And again, once we cut, we'll come back. We'll get to that part of the video. Other than that, that's where we're at. So we're going to get started on the acetone Bondo brush, and in the meantime, maybe we'll go ahead and sand down that hip piece so we can start getting some filler in that as well. So thanks for sticking around, and next time you cut back, I'll probably go to a time lapse, or at least a zoom in, so you can kind of see the work that we're doing when we get the Bondo acetone mix. I'm pretty sure it's almost half and half. I add up by thickness, and again, I'll elaborate on that when we come back. Sorry to start gabbering. So hang around, and we're going to cut. I'll get the camera set up, and then we're going to start painting on some Bondo. Thanks. All right, gang. We're back. This is likely to be an interesting segment of the video, because this is going to be one take, and I don't care what happens. We're going to use it. So we're going to be doing the Bondo acetone mix. So we have, I hope this shows up for you. I know I showed you earlier, the Bondo glazing spot putty, and just some general acetone I picked up from the hardware store, and just a disposable glass jar. It has a little bit in it already from a previous project. Let's get started. So I know if you've never done this before, you're probably curious, what is the ratio? And this is really scientific, so take notes. You want to add a blob, maybe that much. Can you hope this comes out? A blob of the Bondo, and then we're going to mix that with a splash of the acetone. I always start with a little less, because you can always add more to thin it out. I like to get it down to the texture of house paint, so kind of thick, but you also want it runny enough that once you start brushing it into your sanded pieces, that it sinks in and fills up that gapped area. And again, the previous videos I've seen on this, I've seen folks mix like giant batches of it, and I like working in smaller batches. You have more flexibility that way. I get called away to do things, and I also have the attention span of a squirrel and like to just jump from thing to thing. So if I get wrapped up or get caught, need to find something else, then I can just put this aside, and I just splashed. Oh well. So I hope you guys can see that. It'll come. It'll look better once we start painting it on. If you didn't notice already, gloves are preferred. A mask is also preferred. These chemicals aren't nice. Make sure you use it in a well-ventilated area. Off screen is a fan that is constantly blowing. So even though I am not currently wearing a mask, and even when I wear the mask, I have the fan on, and it's always just kind of blowing past my face. So therefore, I don't notice it as much. So there's another recommendation for you. Cheap paint brushes, let's see, and then I just pick a section and just start kind of like layering it on. And since it's mixed with the acetone, it'll evaporate quickly, which is another reason why I like working in smaller batches, and you'll really be able to tell, is it good with just the one layer, or do I need to go back in and add some more to it? And I also like doing smaller sections. It's easier to control, and it's also much more, it's better to sand, in my opinion. I really don't like sanding. Not that I imagine anybody watching does, in case anybody is watching. So yeah, that's it. I'll sit here and paint in section until it's done, and then I'll take it out into the garage and sand it. I'll usually wait you can wait till the full thing's done, or sometimes it just gets frustrating doing giant pieces like that, so you'll just do like the top half, go sand it, and then the bottom half. And again, since you still have to join this area here, there's really no need to pay that much attention to how well this area turns out. There are even some little areas under here that don't look like they were sanded at all, so we can be able to see how those turn out. So yeah, that's it. Not the worst part of droid building. I'll generally throw a documentary on or listen to some music. I know okay, so again, I heard this from Darkwing Dad, and he has his badges thinned down to the point where he applies it with an airbrush. And at the time when I first started using this method, I did not have an airbrush. And now that I do, I'm kind of curious to see how that works. I mean, he seems to have no problems with it. You can always go check out his videos, which I encourage you to do. Again, I'm not trying to take credit for somebody else's ideas here, but maybe I will spend a few bucks on a cheap adapter and try the airbrush technique as well. So there you go. It's that simple. And again, if we look really close, you can kind of see what areas are working and what areas are being filled and what areas need an additional coat and more coverage. Keep in mind that we're going to be touching these areas once we have to assemble the whole leg anyway, and at that point you're probably going to want to go through and do a few more overpasses and fix some areas. I mean, we're going to find areas, and there's going to be some times even after we get the primer on and get possibly even the first coat of paint, we're going to find some spots that are just going to be so frustrating you're going to want to go back and redo them. But the nice thing about doing the droids is that they're going to get messed up. So some scratches and dings aren't that frustrating. What did Bob Ross say? Happy mistakes? So yeah, we got one section done. Some of you may decide, hey, I want to go out, sand it, and see what it looks like now. And I'm going to do the whole part. And let's actually take a look at like a really, really horribly sanded piece that I dropped the ball on. And this has like a bunch of layers. I hope you guys can get a good look at that. I apologize if you don't, but there's a bunch of layer lines still in there. It's ugly. Oh, and I really don't like secondary sanding on these types of pieces. They're so big. So as you do it, and again, like, so as an example, how I went quick there, and you can see how a lot of it didn't really sink in. So another thing to point out, so as it'll evaporate in here as well, so it starts sludging at the bottom. So frequently mix. I will frequently add more acetone to it. And actually, I probably should have shut that. I cut down on the vapor. And one interesting thing I've noticed doing it in the small batches like this is it'll eventually get to a point, because as it runs lower, you'll add more of the Bondo, more of the acetone to it to keep working with it. It gets to a point where it almost becomes like a white color. And when it reaches that point, add just a splash of acetone in it, mix it up, and then I get a paper towel and just sit there and just really pull the rest of that gunk out, because it really doesn't work that well when trying to fill and sand. So hopefully it gets to that point while we're working with it, and if it does, I will point it out to you. So yeah, you can see how, since it has that thicker consistency, it seems to be layering well on top of the, and filling in those gaps. So I'm going to keep it as it is. I'm going to switch back over to the first piece and finish that up. And we'll either do a time lapse if this video looks well, or I will stop and we will catch back up when I'm in the garage and we sand these down. Okay, I wanted to break in real quick and point something out. So in our initial passes, the mixture was a little bit thicker, so it didn't soak into some of the heavier areas quite as well. But in the most recent batch, as things were thinning out, I added a bit more acetone, and it's in more of a liquid state than it was previously. And now that this is dried and it's evaporated off, you can take the thinned down version, and you can really tell me it's running. And I'll go back over it and hit the spots where it didn't saturate into the layer lines quite as well. And I'm imagining this is more of the texture that we're going to work with if we decide to try it with the air gun. Okay, so this is the perfect time to wrap up the video. As you can kind of tell, it's whiter on this area than it is on these, which to me indicates that something is happening chemically inside of there. And I mentioned before how it gets to the point where you eventually just have to get rid of the sludge that's in there and start fresh. And we were approaching that point, and this is the giveaway. It applies much differently than it does before. I have to do it in several different layers in order to make sure it seeps down. And then I take the, then it's all, again, sludged in certain parts. So you take the more watered down version or a thinned out down version and kind of paint it and try to brush it in. So it's getting less workable at this point. So I'm actually to the point now where I will probably go dump this, mix it with water, dump it, rip it aside with a paper towel, and come back and start fresh. So I'm going to finish up the parts that we have, and the next time I check in, we will be in the garage. We will sand down these pieces to see what they look like and determine if we need to hit them again or wait until we get it assembled and go from there. Hey, we're back out in the garage, and if you can't tell by my dress, it is cold outside. So we spent a few days getting the Bondo acetone mix painted onto our printed parts, and in that time here in Ohio, the temperature dropped and we started getting some snow. Happy holidays. So we are out here trying to keep warm, and we're going to do some sanding. And I start off using 320 grit paper. The brand I use is Duragold. This is the best value I found. If you have suggestions, send them my way. It is also usable when we go to wet sand, so that's another added plus for having this particular brand. Sheets are larger, so when I get them, I cut them in half and then I fold them, and that's how I get started. I apologize for being so granular. This is good for those of you just getting started out if you have those little meticulous questions. Also fun to have handy are some sanding sticks. They're not a necessity, but they come in handy once in a while. I have our wire brush that came with the file set. I will use this on the sandpaper to dislodge any of the debris that may remain stuck inside of the grit so that we can get a little extra mileage out of it. Rubber gloves, of course, I've become a fan of. Our mask, which is behind the camera. Later, when we start doing the wet sanding, I'll have a garbage can handy, and here is a spray bottle of water, and of course, our pieces. And these will be fun to work on. Some good examples to use. If you can look in there and tell, it's a bunch of little pock marks, and we can still see some of the layer lines. So it'll be fun to sand this down and work on a little bit more and see it progress, so that way you have a better idea of what it looks like. So that's all I have going on right now. I'm going to cut this off, mask up, and we'll do a little time lapse of some sanding and see what we have to come back to. Okay, we're going to pause right here and take a look at what we've accomplished so far. With our first initial sanding of the Bondo acetone mixture, we can already tell that there are some areas we're going to need to fill in some more. There's still some layer lines visible, but you can also tell and feel where it's smoothed out and has actually started to work already. If you come across sandpaper that isn't getting any further, set it aside. We will use this later when we come down to the wet sanding. But for right now, we're going to take these parts that we sanded down once, we're going to take them back inside. We're going to know the mixture of acetone and Bondo, and then we'll bring them back outside, sand them a second time, and get ready for the next step in the process. All right, so I just came back outside from applying a second coat of our Bondo acetone mixture. I did it light over the entire thing. There was a lot of, most of the areas were actually pretty good. I was surprised. It looked much worse than I thought it was going to be. There were some areas, especially where those holes were that we witnessed earlier. I did a direct application of Bondo to try to fill those. I'm gonna have to probably do a different approach, and we'll address that in a later video. But because this is just one section of the entire leg piece, we still have more sanding to do as where the seams are going to be at. So once we address those, I'll also address other areas of soreness, such as these little holes. And then the next step in the process will be to apply a filler primer and wet sand that. Speaking of wet sanding, one thing you will see as we sand this piece down is the sandpaper, as it becomes clogged with debris that we're sanding with the Bondo mixture. I will begin to spray it with our water bottle to release some of that, and then that'll begin the process of wet sanding this piece as well. So watch for that. I'll go ahead and put it on a time lapse, and we'll be check back after that's over. So, this shin brings episode 3 to a close. It may not feel like much, but we have a lot of ground to cover. If you remember, in episode 2, we took care of the initial sanding, and now in episode 3, we did our acetone Bondo mix. We've done 2 layers of that. I'm pretty satisfied with the results. If you could see, there are some slight areas on there that'll be covered up with the primer filler, and as far as our troublesome little dots go, I believe those will be addressed later when we do the seams. I think a drop of super glue and some sandpaper will take care of that pretty easily. So until next time, thank you so much. Have a great holiday if the next video doesn't come out until then. And let's catch up. I have a lot of ground to cover, so hopefully I'll have some more progress to report back for you for the next time. Thanks for sticking around.